Well, in this evening's study, we're going to be looking at three chapters, chapters 21 through 23. This is our sixth session. We last week dealt with clean relationships, chapters 17 to 20. Probably one of the more difficult chapters. I had a number of conversations after the study, and I realized that it's really a tough area to get into because it cuts across so many areas of our lives. And one thing you need to appreciate is that it is there as an example of what God would expect if we were to approach him in our own righteousness. And therefore, failure is not to be something that's excused, but to recognize that God has covered that failure in the blood of Jesus Christ. And that what's being encouraged there in those chapters is really to not be like the world. Ultimately, that's what those chapters were about. Tonight, we're going to be looking at a little bit of the priesthood in terms of how those requirements flow down into that specific subgroup in the nation of Israel. And then we're going to be looking at the 7 feasts of Israel. So chapter 21 begins, we're going to go through 21 and 22 very quickly because I want to really focus on 23. 21 then just speaks of the purity of the priests. There needs to be a definite separation. Not only did God want the nation of Israel to be separate from the nations around them, but even within the nation of Israel, he wanted the priesthood to be seen as separate because God knows why they're there. It's not for their exaltation. It's because they are a type and shadow of Jesus Christ. Now, they foreshadow the characteristics, and that's why when you go through the book of Leviticus, you need to look at this not simply as a mirror that might reflect our image and we might find ourselves in want, but rather that it shows the high expectation that God has in holiness for those who would serve. Ultimately, that's a reflection of Jesus Christ. And as a result, they're to be separated. They're not to touch any dead thing. They're not to act like the pagan priests with their mystical and witchcraft sort of things. They're not to look like the priests. There was a lot of people that had comments about, well, can I cut the edge of my beard and so on and so forth. These were all aspects with regards to appearing like the priests that they left in Egypt and were deposing there in Canaan. Not to worship like the pagan priests did, that of witchcraft. And so really, they're to be set apart. In verses 6 to 15, we have a focus now on the families of the priests. We can choose our friends, but we can't choose our family. And therefore, if you're born into that family, you need to recognize there's an extra spotlight that's put on you, whether you like it or not. And for the family, because the priests are a type of Christ, they were not to be joined to an unfaithful bride. And of course, we're encouraged that in that Jesus Christ is looking for a virgin bride in the sense that he wants a church as a bride that is devoted wholly and solely to him alone. And we have that similar guidance by the Apostle Paul to Timothy in chapter 3 of his first epistle to Timothy, telling them that the husband should be the husband of one wife, and so on and so forth. And so this idea of seeing the typology in the chastity and the purity within the marital union was important. So then verse 16, we pick up, and the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to Aaron, saying, no man of your descendants in succeeding generations who has any defect may approach to offer the bread of his God." And so we have this really stringent idea here. As you go on from 16 down to 23, the priest must be without defect. Now, this is difficult because if we really look at what that means, and you can go back and look at it yourself, all of us would be disqualified. Any sort of defect. There's not a human born, I don't think, that doesn't have some sort of a defect in one way or another. But again, this is all because the priests are a type and shadow of Christ. And so as much as was possible, it was a way in which they are foreshadowing the perfection that's within Christ. So we pick up in chapter 22. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to Aaron and his sons, that they separate themselves from the holy things of the children of Israel, and that they do not profane my holy name by what they dedicate to me. I am the Lord. Say to them, whoever of all your descendants throughout your generations who goes near the holy things which the children of Israel dedicate to the Lord, while he has uncleanness upon him, that person shall be cut off from my presence. I am the Lord." So here we have this instance where people are going to bring things to offer them to God. And the priests, not just the high priest, but all the priesthood are going to be the ones that are receiving this. And they are to receive everything as though it belongs to God. And so they're not to be in a state of uncleanness. They're to reverence everything that comes to them and take care of everything that comes to them. That which is dedicated to God must remain a holy thing. That's what he's saying. The priests were really the caretakers of all that God provided through the people and by the people. And so they were never to become contemptuous of those things. And by the way, that is something that when you're in and around ministry for a long time, it's easy to fall into that sort of mindset where you just sort of take things for granted. And you're not recognizing that absolutely everything that is devoted to God is to be created, is to be addressed as God's property. And so the priests were warned, if you're in an unclean state, don't even touch the things that have been dedicated to me, whatever they were. Now, moving on, verses 4-9, we see, but if the priest becomes unclean by being a leper or having any discharge or by touching any dead thing, he remains unclean for service until the evening time. And so there was a separation. Again, the idea was throughout the day, if in your daily doings you came across something that would defile you as to being perfect in the eyes of the law, then you were to isolate yourself until evening time. You would take a bath, and then from that point you would be clean. This is all ceremonial, of course. Interestingly enough, when you're in Israel today, there's a central street in the old city called David Street, and if you see an Orthodox Jew with his long coat coming down this very crowded shop area, it's very congested there, you'll see them draw all their clothes in and walk very quickly. And they're trying desperately not to touch anyone as they move down through this section of the old city of Jerusalem. And so you begin to see a little bit of that within just the Orthodox Jews there, that idea that I will be unclean by what I touch. Well, here the priests are told, if they touch anything that makes them unclean, then they have to separate themselves and remain separate till the evening. Verses 10-13 are the provisions for the priests. Now, because of this isolation, they can't go out into the shops and the markets to provide for themselves. And that which is offered to them as food is holy and only for them and their immediate family. So things were going to be donated to them, crops, vegetables, fruits, everything, cattle are going to be donated to them as gifts from the people. They're to treat all of those gifts as though they are holy, and they're to give thanks to God for them. And it's for their immediate family only. And therefore, in that sense, they weren't to take that food and then turn it into some kind of a welfare program outside of the priesthood. It was to be consumed inside of the priesthood. Then we have the idea of the perfect offering. All sacrifices, according to the law, are to be perfect. No cast-offs. No, honey, what are we going to do with this? I don't know. Let's give it to the church kind of a thing. And sadly, throughout my short history with ministry, have seen that, where somebody goes, I don't know what to do with this. Maybe the church can use it. Instead, it was to be the best of whatever you had was to come forward. Now, just as the priests were holy, everything that was given was to be holy and as high quality as was humanly possible. Again, everything is a type and shadow of Christ in the whole sacrificial system, both that which is offered, the facilities, the furnishings, the priests, the actions in all of them. And we've just given you a summary over the last few weeks, but it's all in one sense or another a type and shadow of the perfection that would be performed in the person of Jesus Christ. And so everything that's to be sacrificed is to be perfect. Verse 26, and the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, when a bull or a sheep or a goat is born, it shall be 7 days with its mother, and from the 8th day and thereafter it shall be accepted as an offering made by fire to the Lord. Whether it is a cow or an ewe, do not kill both her and her young on the same day. And when you offer a sacrifice of thanksgiving to the Lord, offer it of your own free will. On the same day that it shall be eaten, you shall leave none of it until morning. I am the Lord. Therefore you shall keep my commandments and perform them. I am the Lord. You shall not profane my holy name, but I will be hallowed among the children of Israel. I am the Lord who sanctifies you, who brought you out of the land of Egypt to be your God. I am the Lord. And so as we close that out, we see God again is saying, no matter what you do, it needs to be out of a free will. Now, this is important for us to recognize, because one of the things that religion in and of itself does in the hearts of mind of people is the law can be transferred into a sense of being compelled. The law states we must do this and we must do that. And the more that you drift toward the legal side of a relationship with God, the less you will understand the relationship that is acquired through love. The more you drift to the law, the further you drift away from that relationship that's driven by love. And ultimately, God is giving these directions to the nation of Israel because he loves them. And he's going to eventually send them a high priest that's perfect, send them a sacrifice that's perfect. And they, being the oracles of God, are going to be the protectorate of these rites and rituals. But they won't attain that deep relationship with God if it's not something that's done out of a free will. And so every aspect of worship needs to be holy, because everything that's done represents the work of Jesus Christ. The high priest is perfect and holy, just as Christ is. Our sacrifices are holy and perfect, because that needs to be the highest standard that we have in our life. Not simply that we're involved in some relationship or some ritual that we do because we want to somehow have spiritual life insurance. It really needs to become the center of our life. And as a result of that, you can see that throughout the history of Israel. When the nation of Israel is in a good place with God, he causes them to be at peace with their enemies. He causes the nation to do well. But when they follow the nations around them and fall away from God, that's the point at which God removes his protection and provision. So now we come to chapter 23. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, speak to the children of Israel and say to them, the feasts of the Lord, which you shall proclaim to the holy convocations, these are my feasts. 6 days shall work be done, but the 7th day is a Sabbath of solemn rest, a holy convocation. You shall do no work in it. It is the Sabbath of the Lord in all your dwellings. These are the feasts of the Lord, holy convocations, which you shall proclaim at their appointed times. And so this term appointed times is interesting. In Hebrew, it's the moed, and the multiple is moedim. It's the feast or the special times. Now, there's an interesting heptadic structure, the sevenfold structure of all of these different types of celebrations in the nation of Israel. There's, of course, 7 days to a week, ending in Shabbat, the time of rest. There's 7 weeks to the Feast of Weeks. We'll come on to that. There's 7 months to the Feast of Tabernacles. There's 7 years to a sabbatical year, and there's 7 sabbatical years to the year of Jubilee. And so the very structure of all of these various celebrations are all structured around this idea of 7. Now, the important thing to recognize here, to God, 7 is the number of rest, not work. Creation, the Sabbath began in Genesis. God created the world and everything is in it in 6 days, and the 7th day he rested. And therefore, these celebrations should not be an instance which should cause more work. They should be a celebration where they cause us to rest. And ultimately, as we will come to it, that rest that we have is in the completed work of Jesus Christ upon the cross. That's our Sabbath. People will say to me oftentimes, do you keep Shabbat? And I say, yes, every day. Every day. Now, we'll come on to a little bit of that later, but what I'm trying to get to is all of these are built around this heptadic structure, which is to remind Israel at every juncture to rest in God's provision. Now, there are 52 Sabbaths in a year. There are the 7 days of Passover. There's 1 day of Shavuot, which is the Feast of Weeks. There's one of Rosh Hashanah, which is the Feast of Trumpets. There's 1 day of Yom Kippur. There's 7 days of Sukkot, that's the Feast of Tabernacles, and one which is the 8th day of Assembly after all that, and it's 70 days. And that's, again, a very significant number. As you go through the Old Testament, you'll find there's 70 nations, there's 70 this and 70 that. And so that speaks of a completion of all the times of rest within the nation of Israel within a year. Now, for Israel, these are all memorials. For the church, these can also be very prophetic, and we'll take a look at both of those as we go through this. Colossians 2 tells us this: let no one judge you in food or drink or regarding a festival or a new moon or a Sabbath, which are a shadow of things to come, but the substance is of Christ. Just remember that. When somebody tries to draw you back, are you keeping the feast? Are you keeping Sabbath? I say yes. Colossians 2 tells us that. They are all types and shadows of that which is completed in Jesus Christ. Now, in our first study, I made mention of this way of looking at the structure of this book, and especially the feasts themselves, around what I call the message in the menorah. There are 7 branches, 3 to one side, 3 to the other, and a central. And when we look at these 7 feasts of Israel, we see that as they line up, the center feast is that of Pentecost. We also pointed out that there's a symmetry within the book, that the offerings in chapters 1 to 7 and the promises, which are in 24 and 27, complement one another. That which deals with the priesthood and the feasts are in chapters 8 to 10, and then again in 21 to 23. Clean living and clean relationships, chapters 11 to 15 and 17 to 20. And then, of course, that which we focused on chapter 16, the Day of Atonement, is the centerpiece in terms of the themes within the book themselves. Now, on the 14th day of the first month at twilight is the Lord's Passover. Now, to understand this, because we're going to get some things that are going to seem like they're crossing each other, we're going to first look at what a biblical day is. It's based on 24 hours, 12 hours of night, 12 hours of day. Now, the modern day begins at midnight. That's what we're used to. And then first light starts the 12 hours of daylight, and then we have 12 hours from sundown until midnight on a general 24-hour day. To the Jews, the biblical day starts at sundown. And so we would look at that as the evening of the previous day. That begins the day that you're entering. And so for us tonight, this is Thursday evening. We're already in the night of Thursday, even though we're here on a Wednesday. All right? And that's important for us to understand that, because we're going to start to see the way in which the calendars and the days begin to get counted as we deal with this. And so the day starts at sundown, literally at twilight. When the sun goes down and they can see 3 stars, then they know that's the beginning of the next day. Now, the first feast that is dealt with here is Passover. It's celebrated beginning at sundown on the 14th of Nisan. Nisan falls generally between March and April time frame. It's a moving calendar each year because of the 365-day calendar that we have now, and therefore it's moving throughout a 7-year period. And this is also called the first month. Now, the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, saying, "This month shall be the beginning of months. It shall be the first month of the year to you." Now, so Nisan is the religious first month. To explain that, you need to appreciate Israel has 2 parallel calendars. There's the religious calendar that begins with the month of Nisan and goes around Tishri being the 7th. But the civil calendar was defined in Genesis chapter 1. That starts at Tishri, and you'll understand when we get to the Feast of Trumpets why that is so. That's the beginning of the year, and their Rosh Hashanah, which is their New Year's, is the 1st of Tishri. So the Passover. It was given to them to remember their Exodus. Exodus 12, "Speak to all the congregation of Israel, saying, on the 10th of this month, every man shall take for himself a lamb according to the house of his father, a lamb for a household." Skip down to verse 6. "Now you shall keep it until the 14th day of the same night. Then the whole assembly of the congregation of Israel shall kill it at twilight. Now the blood shall be a sign for you on the houses where you are. And when I see the blood, I will pass over you, and the plague shall not be on you to destroy you when I strike the land of Egypt. So this day shall be to you a memorial, and you shall keep it as a feast to the Lord throughout your generations. You shall keep it as a feast by an everlasting ordinance." And so this tracks back when Israel is in Egypt, that in anticipation of what God was going to do on the 14th of Nisan, on the 10th of Nisan, they were to select a lamb for the household, and they were to bring it into their house. Now, one might have asked, if you just are looking at the book of Exodus, what's that all about? Bring an animal from the herd and let it live inside of the house? Yes, that's what they're told to do, because that's going to look forward to an event that'll take place some years later. Now, the lamb is chosen on the 9th or the 10th day of Nisan, and when it comes to Passover, the meal they eat is called a Seder meal, or a meal of order. And it's used by the head of the house to basically explain the events of the Exodus. And there are many types and shadows in that. If you've ever been through a Seder meal, it's quite exciting to see the symbols that they partake as a matter of tradition, but you will see Christ in every one of the symbols that they are partaking. We recognize a few of those in the fact that when we share communion together, there are some similarities that the Jews, of course, take as a part of the whole Seder meal. Number one, they start their meal with 3 unleavened loaves, those thin cracker-looking things. And they take the 3 of them and put it into a pouch that has 3 pockets, because that's the symbol of unity, not realizing they're symbolizing the Trinity. And even the word Elohim, in the beginning, Elohim created the heavens and the earth. That is a plural, which is 3. Nonetheless, from that, they will take the middle loaf and they break it. And that second portion of that middle loaf is what Jesus takes at the end of the meal. It's called the afikomen. And he will take it, and that's what he breaks and says, "This is my body, which is broken for you." And so the Jews, as they do that, the very first thing the head of the house does is take that middle wafer out, break it in half, put half of it back so unity is restored, and the other part is wrapped in a cloth and is kept to the end of the meal. I mean, how obvious is that if you're looking through the lens of the New Testament? And then, of course, the final cup. There are 4 cups of wine throughout the meal, each having meaning. But Jesus takes the final cup and he says, this is a cup of a new covenant. They understood from more than 1,500 years of traditional history what that meal was to mean. It was reminding them of what took place in the past in Egypt. But Jesus transposes all of that to reflect on himself with those 2 elements, the broken bread and the final cup. And on the 15th day of the same month is the feast of unleavened bread to the Lord. 7 days you must eat unleavened bread. On the first day you shall have a holy convocation. You shall do no customary work on it, but you shall offer an offering made by fire to the Lord for 7 days. The 7th day shall be a holy convocation. You shall do no customary work on it. And so now we come to the Feast of Unleavened Bread. It's a celebration that starts the day after Passover, the 15th of Nisan, and it lasts for 7 days, so from the 15th to the 22nd. The 15th would start as a holy convocation. Basically, it's an extra Shabbat. And then it ends. Because its day is moving all the time, Passover can land on any day of the week. And so this rotation is going to start, and then once they start, they're in the Feast of Unleavened Bread. It will last for 7 days, and they have special sacrifices, and they're not to have any leaven in their house. No leaven is to be eaten, not just in bread, but in anything. No leaven is to be found in the house. And so they're only to eat, and you can see it in the supermarkets here, the matzah crackers. If it says fit for kosher, then you know this is what they would eat in a Jewish home today. And they're unleavened sort of wafers. It begins and ends with this holy convocation. Now, in Exodus 12, they're told what they're to do at this point. 7 days you shall eat the unleavened bread. On the first day you shall remove leaven from your houses. For whoever eats leavened bread from the first day until the 7th day, that person shall be cut off from Israel. And so it literally is a time that they go through and not just ceremonially, in every way, every bit of leaven. If there's a piece of bread that had leaven in it, it's gone. Everything is cleared out. No leaven in the house. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, speak to the children of Israel and say to them, when you come into the land which I give to you and reap its harvest, then you shall bring a sheaf of the first fruits of your harvest to the priest. He shall wave the sheaf before the Lord to be accepted on your behalf, and on the day after the Sabbath, the priest shall wave it. And you shall offer it on that day when you wave the sheaf, a male lamb of the first year without blemish, as a burnt offering to the Lord. Its grain offering shall be 2/10 of an ephah of fine flour mixed with oil, and an offering made by fire to the Lord for sweet aroma. And its drink offering shall be of wine 1/4 of a hin. You shall eat neither bread nor parched grain nor fresh grain until the same day that you have brought an offering to your God. It shall be a statute forever throughout your generations in all your dwellings. And so they have Passover, and unleavened bread is to be carried out from the time that they leave Egypt until they enter the Promised Land, and then this holiday, which is referred to as the Feast of First Fruits. It's always on a Sunday. Notice the rest of them can be on any day of the week, but this one is always to be on the Sabbath that follows Passover. So if Passover was on a Monday, then it would be the Sunday. If Passover was on a Saturday, then it would be the following Saturday, Sunday. But it's this first fruits is always on a Sunday. That's the first of the week, the 8th day, the time of new beginnings. All right, the day after the Sabbath, the priest shall wave it. And so they ceremonially do this harvest. Generally, when the temple was up, Solomon's temple, they would go down to the Kidron Valley, and the high priest would ceremonially reap a small sheaf from the barley harvest. And notice, as the offerings are being offered during this, there's no sin offering. they go straight to offerings of consecration. This is a time of celebration of God's provision. They offer a burnt offering, a grain offering, and a drink offering. And this drink offering is not something that's trivial. A hin is approximately a gallon. Therefore, a quarter of a hin is about a quart of wine would be poured out on the altar. So there would just be this puff of steam that goes up. Now, I want to point something out here with these three holidays because they work into, of course, the ministry and final passion of Jesus Christ. In 32 AD, the 10th of Nisan was Saturday going into Sunday. I believe that was the day of the triumphal entry. We are told that they were in Bethany on the 8th. They couldn't travel on the 9th because it's Shabbat. And so to get to the top of the Mount of Olives, they would have to go on the next day after Shabbat, and that would be the 10th of Nisan. This is the first and only day that Jesus allows himself to be revealed to the people and honored as the Messiah. All other times in his ministry, when they would try to take him and make him king or whatever, he'd say, no, it's not my time. Why? Because this time, the 10th of Nisan, was when that declaration would take place. Now, the 14th of Nisan then falls on a Wednesday evening into a Thursday. The evening after twilight would be the Last Supper. The daytime is the time of the crucifixion. It starts at 9 o'clock in the morning and it ends at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. That's when he's taken down at the 9th hour. You need to appreciate that double 12-hour clock. The 12 hours of the day start at 6 o'clock in the morning. So when it says the 9th hour, that's after 6 o'clock. All right? So that's 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So he would be in the grave by 3 p.m. The 15th of Nisan, you've just read, is a day of holy convocation. They are to do no work. He's in the tomb. And remember, they hurried to put the body in there and needed to get it off the cross before twilight because it was coming up to the Feast of Unleavened Bread. The 16th is when the Shabbat starts. So at the end of the first day of Feast of Unleavened Bread is a normal Sabbath. And this is what some scholars refer to as a double Sabbath, one next to another. Then the Sabbath ends on the evening of Saturday night going into Sunday, and that is the time of the resurrection. And if you take that way of looking at things, that fulfills exactly what Jesus said in Matthew chapter 12, verse 40. That as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth, so the Son of Man will be 3 days and 3 nights in the grave. And I know there's lots of, you can get different Bible commentaries that put the crucifixion on Friday and puts it on Wednesday and all these other things. But this is just a simple way of looking at the actual dates in 32 AD. Now, again, back to the first fruits, the Apostle Paul tells us this in 1 Corinthians 12. He says, "For since by man came death, by man also came the resurrection of the dead. For as in Adam all die, even so in Christ all shall be made alive. But each one in his own order, Christ the first fruits, afterwards those who are Christ at his coming." And so there Christ being referred to as the first fruits, which is the 17th of Nisan. But there's one other factor that I want to bring out here, and this is why you need to understand the dual calendars. When you look at Genesis chapter 8, you see, "And the ark rested in the 7th month, the 17th day of the month, on the mountains of Ararat." Now, remember I said in Genesis, the year starts at the month of Tisri. Therefore, Nisan would be the 7th month. The 7th civil month is the religious first month, okay? Therefore, the ark rested on the 17th of Nisan, the day of the resurrection of Jesus Christ. So the end of God's judgment upon the earth was declared as finished when the ark rested on the 17th of Nisan during the time of Noah. And so it's the same day as the resurrection, the 17th of Nisan, 32 AD. And you shall count for yourselves from that day, from the day after the Sabbath, from the day that you brought the sheaf of the wave offering, 7 Sabbaths shall be completed. Count 50 days to the days after the 7th Sabbath. Then you shall offer a new grain offering to the Lord. You shall bring for your dwellings 2 wave loaves of 2/10 of an ephah. They shall be of fine flour. They shall be baked with leaven. They are the first fruits to the Lord. And you shall offer with the bread 7 lambs of the first year without blemish, 1 young bull, 2 rams. They shall be a burnt offering to the Lord with their grain offerings and their drink offerings and the offering made by fire for a sweet aroma to the Lord. Then you shall sacrifice 1 kid of the goats as a sin offering, 2 male lambs of the first year as a sacrifice of the peace offering. The priest shall then wave them with the bread of the first fruits as a wave offering before the Lord with the 2 lambs. They shall be holy to the Lord for the priests. You shall proclaim on the same day that it is a holy convocation to you. You shall do no customary work on it. It shall be a statute forever in all your dwellings throughout your generations. And so now we come to the festival of weeks. Now it's known as Pentecost. Pentecost comes from the idea of 50 days after the Sabbath that followed Passover, counting 7 weeks plus a day, 50 days. Now, this is the first fruits of the barley. We had the wave offering at the first fruits is more ceremonial. This now is the first fruits of the barley harvest. This is for the Jew. This is when they like to commemorate the giving of the Torah, the first 5 books of Moses, at Mount Sinai. And so it's the anniversary of the giving of the law in Exodus chapter 20. But in Acts chapter 2, Pentecost, of course, you're familiar with Acts chapter 2, that it's the birth of the church in Jerusalem. And so for the church, it's special. But for the nation of Israel, it's also special. It's the giving of the law. And what does the law do? The Bible tells us the law is our schoolmaster that brings us to Christ. And that's exactly what it does. It's there to bring us to Christ so that we no longer have to look at the shadow, but we look at the substance of Jesus Christ. Now, both observations in observing the Feast of First Fruits and Pentecost are always on a Sunday. It's the only Jewish holiday that will always be on a Sunday. It's never on a Shabbat. It's always on a Sunday by design. The wave offering are made of 2 loaves, not sheaves now. These are full loaves that have been made with fine ground flour. And they're made with leaven. Now, this is unusual. Wait a minute. I thought the whole thing of Pentecost and the Feast of Unleavened Bread was to get rid of the leaven. And yet here we have leaven. What's the difference? Well, I conjecture this. The Feast of Unleavened Bread is to recognize that as Christ goes to the cross, the leaven of sin is dealt with. And as he's in the grave, the pain of death is dealt with. And the victory is described to all mankind through the resurrection of Jesus Christ. That's where the declaration, the victory lap comes out. And as the nation of Israel is ceremonially cleaning out the leaven, Jesus Christ clears out the leaven once and for all by his shed blood upon the cross. And now on the day of Pentecost, we have the loaves that are lifted up to God in worship as the first harvest happens to be also the anniversary of the church. And I believe the leaven, it signifies the early church would not be perfect. And we aren't perfect. You've heard it said many times, if you ever find a perfect church, don't join it. Because God knows who we are. And in spite of that, in fact, because of that, he covers us with his mercy. and his grace, so that we are not under the burden of the law, but we see through the law as the avenue by which we understand the perfection of Jesus Christ and what he accomplished for us through his own sacrifice of himself. Now, when you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not reap the corners of your field when you reap, nor shall you gather any gleanings from your field. You shall leave them for the poor and for the stranger. I am the Lord. Now, in the midst of all of this about the feasts, all of a sudden we have a backtrack. This really is a repeat of what we've already read in chapter 19, verses 9 and 10. It's the law of sowing and reaping, but leaving area for people to glean. Now, why put this here? I think it's very important. It's very important. Why? Because this is a connection to the book of Ruth. You see, at Passover, one of the books the Orthodox Jews read is the book of Ruth, because they believe it takes place at this first barley harvest in Israel. And yet, you need to appreciate the story of Ruth. Naomi, who's a Jew, loses her husband and then her two sons. And as she is leaving the land of Moab, which, by the way, Moses described as being cursed up until the 10th generation, Naomi and her husband go into the land of Moab is the wrong place to be if you're a Jew. And he was also leaving his inheritance in the area of Bethlehem. And so there's lots of very powerful types and shadows there. And so she's returning to Israel from Moab with Ruth, who's a Gentile. Now, Ruth gleans in the field of Boaz. That's a type and shadow. How does Ruth get to know what's taking place there? In the same way, how do we understand what God is doing in our life? Through the Bible. And so she gleans in the field of Boaz. Boaz is a kinsman redeemer. He's a type and shadow of Jesus Christ. He purchases the lost inheritance for Naomi, which is the nation of Israel, to gain Ruth as his wife, which is the church. And you can, in those 4 simple chapters of Ruth, I've done it. I've actually sat with Orthodox Jews and taken them through the book of Ruth and preached the gospel of Jesus Christ because of the type and shadows that are there. They're very powerful. And so thus you have this law of gleaning. It's sort of stuck in the middle of these feasts. It seems out of place, but not so, because it's dealing with the feast of Passover. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the children of Israel, saying, in the 7th month, on the first day of the month, you shall have a Sabbath's rest, a memorial of blowing trumpets, a holy convocation. You shall do no customary work on it, and you shall offer an offering made by fire to the Lord." And so we come to Feast of Trumpets. Now, it's known as Rosh Hashanah also. It's the Jewish civil new year. And it's celebrated on the 1st of Tisri, which normally falls in the September-October time frame. It really is when the Jews are celebrating creation. As far as they are concerned, the clock starts with the creation of the world on the 1st of Tisri. And they will tell you that actually man is created on Mount Moriah, that the place of the habitation of Adam and Eve was there already in the promised land. And so on that day of Rosh Hashanah, they have lots of traditions, and one is to go out with a ram's horn and make these blasts 100 times to celebrate with their shofar the creation itself. Now, it signifies also the beginning of the final harvest. This is the autumn time frame, and it's the final harvest, and it's the beginning of the sabbatical year. So if they're counting sabbatical years, this would be the year when they would take the year off and wouldn't farm anything. They would just glean from the field based on what was already planted there. And there's an interesting tradition they have when you're there. My wife and I have been in Israel during Rosh Hashanah. And they had this lovely tradition where they take sliced apples and they dip it in this lovely honey and they offer it to you. And it's an expression of saying, have a good year, have a sweet year. And so you go all these little stands and these apples are everywhere and these fresh honey is everywhere. And you're just, it's just one of these things you do to celebrate Rosh Hashanah. Now, there is prophetic significance in the minds of some. For Israel, it calls for 7 days of repentance. So they come out of their celebration, which effectively is about 2 days, and they come into 7 days of repentance and reflection. For the church, some link the Feast of Trumpets with the rapture for obvious reasons. Obviously, in all instances, there's a reference to the blowing of a trumpet that signals the rapture. But then again, if you study the book of Revelation, you realize there's lots of trumpets going on. In fact, even while Moses is on Mount Sinai, the people heard the voice of the Lord as though it was the blowing of a trumpet. And so, but some teachers, good teachers, will say that the Feast of Trumpets is something we should always look to every year, because if there's going to be a rapture, it'll be on the 1st of Tisri. I think that's a little too precise for me. I think it's going to be more of a surprise than that. But there have been some teachers who have actually nailed their credibility to the 1st of Tisri on a certain year, and then it doesn't come about, and they say, well, maybe it's next year, but it's always the 1st of Tisri because of the Feast of Trumpets. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, also the 10th day of this month shall be a day of atonement. It shall be a holy convocation for you. You shall afflict your souls and offer an offering made by fire to the Lord. You shall do no work on the same day, for it is the day of atonement, to make atonement for you before the Lord your God. For any person who is not afflicted in soul on the same day shall be cut off from his people. And any person who does work on that same day, that person I will destroy from among his people. You shall do no manner of work. It shall be a statute forever throughout your generations in all your dwellings. It shall be to you a Sabbath of solemn rest, and you shall afflict your souls on the 9th day of the month at evening. From evening to evening you shall celebrate your Sabbath. And so now we come to the Day of Atonement. Of course, we dealt with that in detail in chapter 16, but here it comes up in its order. We have the celebration on the 10th of Nisri. It's Israel's most holy day. Everything stops there, literally everything. Again, my wife and I have been there during Yom Kippur, and everything stops. There's no cafes open. There's nothing that you can do really except walk around in the old Christian quarter. They're still selling things there. They don't recognize Yom Kippur. Now, the details we went through in our study in chapter 16, we won't go through those again, other than to remind you that what takes place is a sacrifice for the whole of Israel. The high priest offers a sacrifice for himself first, and then they take 2 goats that are offered for the people. There is the Lord's goat, which is sacrificed, and there is the scapegoat, which receives the blood of the Lord's goat and then is banished into the wilderness. And we dealt with that in our chapter 16 study. Now, today's observance, we see the 1st of Tisri is the Feast of Trumpets. Then we have these 7 days of repentance. There's a Shabbat in there, so they don't count that, 7 days of repentance. And these are called the days of awe. And it's to prepare their hearts, really, to understand the importance of the Day of Atonement. And as I pointed out in my chapter 16 study when we were there, the nation of Israel has not been able to have a Day of Atonement since the time of King Hezekiah. In the Second Temple period after Ezra, there's no Ark of the Covenant in there. Therefore, there can be because the one time of the year the high priest goes in with the blood of the Lord's goat and sprinkles it on the mercy seat. If there's no mercy seat, there's no Day of Atonement. And so through the entire Second Temple period and through the ministry of Jesus Christ, there is no Day of Atonement. Interesting. So they afflict themselves for 7 days. They go through this balancing issue. Was I good? Was I bad? How was my last year? Next year is going to be better. It's days of awe. Some think that's a foreshadowing of the tribulation period. Because we are told in Hosea chapter 5, Jesus says, the Lord says, I will return to my place till they acknowledge their offense. Then they will seek my face. In their affliction, they will earnestly seek me. And there are many Bible teachers who believe that that's the point at which the nation of Israel finally wakes up and they call out, and that's what Jesus is waiting for, that triggers his second coming. Now, we need to appreciate that we have something better than all of that. Hebrews chapter 9, but Christ came as high priest of the good things to come with the greater and more perfect tabernacle not made with hands, that is, not of this creation. Not with the blood of goats and calves, but with his own blood he entered the most holy place once for all, having obtained eternal redemption. For if the blood of bulls and goats and the ashes of the heifer, sprinkling of the unclean, sanctifies for the purifying of the flesh, how much more shall the blood of Christ, who through the eternal Spirit offered himself without spot to God, cleanse your conscience from dead works to serve the living God? And so that's where we stand. For the nation of Israel, it's a problem for them. When you speak to an Orthodox Jew, how are you dealing with your sin? And they will say, I'm doing my best. I'm trying to outweigh, as if God has a scale in heaven during the days of awe. I think about last year and what I can do better this year. And it really turns into a heavy burden for them. And you remember, I told you, all of these feasts are built around this idea of this being a time of rest. Resting as a memorial of God's provision. But they can't do that. Once you're under the law, once you place yourself under the law, there's no rest, because you're always concerning yourself that you need to make sure that you've, dotted every spiritual I and crossed every spiritual T, so to speak. And for this reason, he is a mediator of a new covenant by means of death, for the redemption of the transgressions under the first covenant, that those who are called may receive the promise of the eternal inheritance. And so we just have such a better opportunity to approach God, because it's not by works of righteousness we have done, but by his mercy he saved us. And that's not being lazy. That's just simply recognizing the work was always going to be a work of God and not of us. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, speak to the children of Israel, saying, 15 days of this 7th month shall be the Feast of Tabernacles for 7 days to the Lord. On the first day there shall be a holy convocation. You shall do no customary work on it. For 7 days you shall offer an offering made by fire to the Lord. On the 8th day you shall have a holy convocation, and you shall offer an offering made by fire to the Lord. It is a sacred assembly, and you shall do no customary work on it. And so the Feast of Tabernacles, it begins on the 15th of Tishri. It's Sukkoth, or booths, and literally Jews move out of their houses into these temporary structures, which is really interesting when you're in a big city. For literally they go out on little porches and little verandas, and if they don't have some place, they go out on the sidewalks, on the streets, and they build these little structures. It's also called the Feast of Ingathering, for it's the end of the final harvest. So everything is done, and they're putting themselves in this place. Now, what's interesting also is it's the time of greatest feasting. The Feast of Tabernacles is the time of great rejoicing. All the harvests are done. All the work is done. They've dealt with their sin because of Yom Kippur, and so they're just enjoying God's provision. It's this time of great celebration. And then for 8 days, they offer sacrifices of thanksgiving and communion. It was also Solomon who dedicated the temple during this feast, 1 Kings chapter 8. Now, As a memorial celebration, it recognizes the daily provision and protection by God. And that's what happens even in Israel today. It is a time of acknowledging God's hand upon the nation of Israel. Even among the secular Jews, they can see the hand of God. They can see that as a nation, they are provided for in a special, unique way. But as a prophetical foreshadowing, I believe there's a type and shadow here which is connected with the bride of Christ. You see, after we are taken into our heavenly abode, there's this event called the marriage supper of the Lamb, which is our final harvest. It's the time our big celebration takes place. And so it can be seen as a type and shadow of that celebration that will take place when all true believers are there with Christ at the marriage supper of the Lamb. And so it's pointing to that. But there's one more prophetic pointer that I want to look at, and it takes place in Zechariah chapter 14. Just so you'll know that these memorials are not just simply looking backwards or even forwards to the church. In Zechariah chapter 14, we read, "And it shall come to pass that everyone who is left of all the nations which came against Jerusalem shall go up from year to year to worship the King, the Lord of hosts, to keep the Feast of Tabernacles." So of all the feasts, the one that will take place during the millennial reign of Jesus Christ, the Feast of Tabernacles. And that's why it is my conjecture that that's also a time when the bride is recognized. The whole world is coming and keeping this memorial, the Feast of Tabernacles, because it's the time when there's a recognition of the feast that takes place at the marriage supper of the Lamb. "These are the feasts of the Lord, which you shall proclaim to be holy convocations, to offer an offering made by fire to the Lord, as a burnt offering and a grain offering, a sacrifice and a drink offering, everything on its day. Besides the Sabbaths of the Lord, besides your gifts, beside all your vows, besides your free will offerings, which you give to the Lord." And so really, this is just saying everything that you're doing, do these as free will offerings to the Lord. "And on the 15th day of the 7th month, when you have gathered in the fruits of your land, you shall keep the feasts of the Lord for 7 days. On the first day there shall be a Sabbath rest. On the 8th day, a Sabbath rest. You shall take for yourselves on the first day of the first fruits of trees, branches of the palm trees, and boughs of leafy trees, and willows of the brook, and you shall rejoice before the Lord your God for 7 days. You shall keep it as a feast to the Lord for 7 days in a year. It shall be a statute forever in your generations. You shall celebrate it in the 7th month. You shall dwell in booths for 7 days. All who are native Israelites shall dwell in booths, that your generations may know that I made the children of Israel dwell in booths when I brought them out of the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God." So Moses declared to the children of Israel the feasts of the Lord. And so again, doubling back on this idea of dwelling in tents, it was to last a total of 8 days. The first day was to be a Sabbath rest, and the 8th day, the Sabbath rest. It represents the number of new beginnings, not just rest, but this is a new beginning. They're to dwell in tents. It represents the temporary aspect of living by faith. How many of you, if you go camping and actually pitch a tent up, I don't know how you do that here in Florida, but nonetheless, how you do that, tents have a way of reminding us the temporary nature of life. It's not, "Honey, I love this tent so much, let's move here." You know it's temporary. And thus, we also need to recognize that that's why they do it, to remind them that this is just temporary. The life around us is temporary. Therefore, we should live our lives as temporary residents in these tents in which we dwell. "But you are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, his own special people, that you may proclaim the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light, who once were not a people, but are now the people of God, who had not obtained mercy, but now have obtained mercy. Beloved, I beg you, as sojourners and pilgrims, abstain from fleshly lusts which war against the soul, having your conduct honorable among the Gentiles, that when they speak against you as evildoers, they, by your good conduct which they observe, glorify God in the day of visitation. And so we have finished our study in chapters 21 to 23. We'll finish up next week, 24 to 27. I encourage you to read ahead as we get ready to close out this book. So let's close with prayer. Father, we thank you that you have laid before us the example of how you really want to bring us into a relationship that is based on rest in your completed works. Lord, may we dwell happily in that which you temporarily give us. May we not hold on to so much of this life, Lord, that we lose hold of that which is eternal. And so, Lord, we thank you for your word. Pray, Lord, that your Holy Spirit would bring to our minds that which is from you. For it's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.